I wanted to talk the entire time in the class, and it was very hard for me to sit still. Every single report card was that Amanda talks too much. I just wanted to talk to the teacher and want to have a conversation about the topic.
When did you first realize that engagement, not productivity, was the point?
I opened a textbook. I remember seeing these 7 levels of engagement, and I said, this is groundbreaking information. If we understand engagement, we can understand learning. And if we can actually change the way that we measure engagement, we can change the way that we measure learning.
Punishments, rewards. How effective is that, in your opinion?
I say to my kids, there's consequences. I often let them decide the consequence based on what they've done. I think, how do I keep them at a higher level of engagement, which is to actually include them as a participant.
My son was working on Legos. I told him we have 5 minutes left till bedtime. Pulled out my phone. I started checking my email. Then I told him it's time for bed. He had a meltdown. Energetically, he knew I was disconnected from him. I wasn't engaged with him.
You were at a 3. You were distracted, which caused him, who was at a 6, he was inspired to build with you, to connect. He dropped to a 3. People think that disengagement is the opposite of engagement, but the opposite of engagement is apathy. And then it's this journey of what's standing in the way of connection.
Welcome to CEOs and ABCs, real stories from execs who lead at work and show up at home, career moves, parenting wins and fails, and everything in between. I'm your host, Kevin Rice. Here's today's episode.
Welcome back to CEOs and ABCs. My guest today is Amanda Slavin, an educator turned consultant whose life work is engagement. She earned her master's in education, opened restaurants during the recession, and spent a decade building a consultancy that taught leaders and brands, think Google, Coca-Cola, Nestle, how to apply the 7 levels of engagement. Along the way, she codified a framework that moves people beyond compliance into meaning and impact, and wrote a book to share it more widely. What makes Amanda's story resonate is the human side. She's a parent of young kids who chooses presence over perfection, invites collaboration on consequences, and models repair and respect at home. Today, we'll talk about why engagement isn't binary, how incentives create shortcuts and traps, spotting quiet quitting before it turns to apathy, and practical ways leaders and parents can build a culture of connection. Welcome back to CEOs and ABCs. My guest today is Amanda Slavin. Amanda, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Amazing. So you've called engagement your life's work, spanning a master's in education, over a decade of leading a consultancy, and now with a book on the topic. When did you first realize that engagement, not necessarily productivity, was the point?
Yeah, that's a question that's bizarrely never been asked to me. And I've been on many a podcast talking about engagement. So you're already getting at a high level of engagement. I love it. When I was a kid, I wanted to talk the entire time in the class. And it was very hard for me to sit still and just wait, share the answer. I actually wasn't even wanting to talk to the kids next to me. I just wanted to talk to the teacher. And I always kind of knew the answer. I wanted to have a conversation about the topic. And I was always getting in trouble for that. And every single report card was that Amanda talks too much. And my teachers really loved me because I was always wanting to have conversations about the topics and bringing other students into it. And I really cared about school. But at the same time, they were really frustrated by me because I was constantly disrupting them, taking them out of their flow. They didn't know what to do with me. And so when I became a teacher, I was a camp counselor for years before I became a teacher. But when I became a teacher and started studying really the pedagogy and what it meant to learn and understand the importance of obviously attention, I started to really uncover what was getting in the way of learning. And I was in so many different learning environments. I was in traditional learning environments. I was in non-traditional learning environments like nature-based learning. I was in really, really underserved, very underfunded areas, very wealthy areas right next to each other, middle school, high school, elementary school. I had to be in all of them. And I just saw this through line of kids that were not engaged and kids that were not passionate about what they were doing. Like me, I was just like not in the right place in the right way. I wasn't engaged in the right way. We're not wanting to learn. And so when I opened a textbook for my thesis during my master's year, I remember seeing this taxonomy, these 7 levels of engagement, and something in me, I don't know what it was. And I said to the colleagues that I was writing the paper with, I said, this is groundbreaking information. If we understand engagement, we can understand learning. And if we can actually change the way that we measure engagement, we could change the way that we measure learning. It was just like a moment, but many moments maybe of my own personal life and my own personal observation.
Yeah. And how did that realization or moment or accumulation of moments kind of inform your career choices? Or actually, even how does it inform your parenting choices today?
So I wanted to be a teacher because I love kids. And I just said I was a camp counselor for a really long time. I think actually a camp counselor is probably going to be more of the role of a teacher in the next 10 to 20 years because of AI, but we'll talk about that later in terms of people that just really love kids, not who are subject area experts. But when I
Yeah.
got into the classroom, I was with this incredible teacher. She had been there for 30 years. She was one of the best teachers I had ever really witnessed. And she just was constantly defending her choices to the school board and to parents. And she was doing nothing wrong. They were always asking her questions. And I realized that actually being a teacher was very little to do with the kids and a lot to do with being able to manage and deal with bureaucracy, build curriculum.
Mm,
You were doing a lot of groundwork from the bottom up in terms of, again, building that curriculum, building lessons, constantly getting everything ready. You have to be very organized and structured. And then you have to be very compliant and a little bit, not complacent, but you have to be able to deal with bureaucracy, which just does not describe my personality. As I just told you how frustrating it was for me to be in the classroom on the other side as a kid. So when I saw that, I said to myself, I'm going to resent the kids and I'm doing this for kids. So I can't just be in this system. And if I want to change the system, I have to get out of it first in order to be able to make a difference. I knew that. I knew I had to kind of prove myself. So in terms of understanding engagement, I knew that I needed to be passionate. I need to be at the higher level of engagement for my own career, my own life, my own sense of self. With kids, it's a little bit different because I guess it's actually quite similar because with your kids, you can't control them. When you think you can control your
mm,
kids, I mean, they'll teach you very quickly. It's not about control. It's really about respect.
yeah.
And it's about creating a relationship with your kids where when you're asking them to do something, you're not demanding it. And the biggest thing that I say to my kids, when my kids are in any way disrespectful for me, speak to me in a way that's, unkind or raise their voice at me. They're 5 and 3. They're literally babies. But I will always say to them, I don't speak like that to you. I don't raise my voice to you. I treat you with respect and consideration, and you will do the same to me. And that's a relationship. And that is a much higher level. And again, sometimes you have to use the incentives. I know the levels, so I'm like, they're not listening, they're distracted. I need to get them to focus. So what do I need to do? Remove the distractions and do something simple, like call to action. I know they're not doing that. I need to use an incentive like level fives, but it's exhausting. All day long, I have these levels in my head every moment. And sometimes it's actually a good thing with parenting where you're just like, I'm gonna just sit on the ground and play with these kids. And today they don't have to clean up. Like that's also okay.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much I want to dig in here with you. But before we do, maybe you could start with kind of a high level overview of the seven levels of engagement. Because I know once you started your company, you've worked with brands like Google and Coca Cola and Nestle to implement this into organizations. What are the seven levels and what distinguishes each level?
When it comes to the levels of engagement, it's really unique because the behaviors never change. But what's interesting is the way that you then assign actions or behaviors associated with each levels does change. So for example, I just gave an example of like a kid being level 3 frustrated engaged. That could look very different than an employee being frustrated engaged or a customer being frustrated engaged. And so the amazing thing about the levels of engagement is that engagement is not binary. It's not disengaged and engaged. People think that it's just easy to go from, oh, I'm not interested to, oh, I'm obsessed with what's going on here. That's not how it works. That's the first thing. The second thing about it is that it's not, I'm kind of engaged at a 4 and I'm very engaged at a 7. Each level is specific and nuanced. So the bottom levels are what stand in the way of engagement. They're pitfalls. They're really, again, what's keeping you from being engaged. And I mean, this is like I can do this in my sleep. Level 1 is disengaged, avoiding or idle. Level 2 is unsystematic engaged. You're confused. You're confused by the messaging. You don't really know what's going on. And level 3 is frustrated engaged. You want to engage, you're distracted, as I mentioned. That is what keeps you from being engaged. And actually, with Gallup, 87% of employees are disengaged. It's active disengagement. It's what it looks like when someone is kind of really trying to connect, but something's standing in the way. And then we have the
Mm,
middle levels. And again, this is with kids. It's just I've worked with teachers all over the world and I always say to teachers, how much time do you spend, and if you're a parent, you know this, trying to get your kid to just not be distracted? Just not be distracted. Just do the most simple, just listen, just
or
sit still,
like
just
sit at dinner and eat dinner without getting
yeah,
up 20 times to run around the room.
exactly. Exactly. Like just anything, like go to the bathroom, brush your teeth, like just do the thing that I said to you. So all day long, teachers are like, they have all these things that they do the claps and they do the, all these fun things like, oh, come and listen. They do all these sing-songy things to get the whole class to listen because they're trying to get all of these kids to listen at the same time. So that's the whole point of the framework is to keep going up a level or to go as high as you can and then stay at the highest level. So 4 is structure dependent engagement, doing what's asked. This is when you're not distracted anymore, but you're just going to do the bare minimum because someone is asking you enough. It's kind of like, okay, I'll do it because it's simple. Like sometimes my daughter's like, okay, because she's like, fine, you won, mom. It's not that big of a deal. And then 5, which is what parents really know, and we know that it always bites us, is that it's self-regulated interest when you're doing something for something else, for an extrinsic motivation. So it's something that excites you, a reward. So we know
Hmm.
when we're like, you can watch the iPad, like in the moment, we got it. But then after, when we have to
Yeah.
take that iPad away, it is level 3 all the way. They fall real quick. And what we want for our
Yeah.
kids, what we want for our team members, what we want for our customers are these highest levels of engagement. Level 6, critical engagement, when you're inspired to set goals to make a difference. When your kid just says, of course I want to clean up the room. Like my kids do this thing where my nails, they like went to get my nail fixed with me. And when I want to open something, they're like, don't do that, mommy. Your nail's going to break. Can I do it? That's when you're inspired to set goals to make a difference. And finally, literate thinking, when your values and beliefs align, when it becomes a part of you, like a job that you've loved more than anything in the world, or a brand that just speaks to you, or again, with the relationship with your kids, those rare, those rare but beautiful moments where you just feel so deeply connected to them, where you're so present with them and they're so present with you, and you don't need it's that flow feeling. It's that true
Yeah.
love feeling. And those are the levels.
You mentioned extrinsic motivations. I think that's where most parents they operate. Punishments, rewards. How effective is that in your opinion? Does it actually create connection or does it actually help frame up behavior that you want to instill in your children? Because I've seen a lot on both sides of the argument about using punishments and rewards in parenting.
Yeah, it's not the way I like to do things. I mean, based on the levels of engagement, I say to my kids, there's consequences. So when my kids do something, and I really have to understand what happened before the consequences decided, and I often let
Mm.
them decide the consequence based on what they've done. So if
Mhm.
it's something that they know is wrong and they have still done it, then there's a consequence. But at the end of the day, for me to punish them, it's something that kids tend to
How would you like?
internalize.
What's the difference between
What's an example?
a consequence, or just the difference in your mind between a consequence and a punishment?
Well, it's the communication around it. So I actually say to my kids, a consequence could be a good or a bad thing. It's not, it's actually like neutral. You do something and there's a reaction, a response to what you've done. And so a consequence could
Hmm.
also be you just feel really bad and you just have to sit with those feelings and think about what you've done. Or a consequence could be that you have to, talk to your sister and have a conversation with her. I work with them to come up with a consequence. A consequence can be no books. Like they don't get books that night. That is quote unquote a punishment, but it's in collaboration with them. So instead of, again, just thinking about how do I prevent a lower level of engagement? How do I prevent them being a distraction or not listening because they're confused or being disengaged, like not listening to me? Instead, I think, how do I keep them at a higher level of engagement, which is to actually include them as a participant in them as people and actually say, what do you think is something that is equal to what you've done? And sometimes my son is like, no books after he's done something that I'm like, that's a no. I'm like, no, we need a bigger consequence based on that action because you knew it was wrong. And this is why. So that's on the quote unquote punishment side. I think that the grown up deciding how to punish a child doesn't teach the child the lesson on why it was wrong in the first place, and it doesn't allow for the child to make a different decision the next time. And that's actually what we're trying to do when we're
Hmm.
punishing the child. We're not just wanting to, we want them to learn and grow and not do it again. So punishing them doesn't actually allow for that to happen. Teaching them does. That's the punish side. The reward side is
Right.
different.
I mean, that's what the word discipline means, disciple, to teach. I've gone from being very authoritarian, drill sergeant daddy, to very passive. And I've tried to find
Mm.
my middle ground. And I've worked with parenting coaches on both ends of the spectrum. And ultimately what I found is it comes back to connection. So I'll give you an example. I shared this the other day. My son was working on Legos. I was sitting next to him. We weren't actually even talking. I told him we have 5 minutes left till bedtime. And I pulled out my phone. I started checking my email. There was like literally nothing there that was important for me to check, but it was just a pattern that I'd fallen into for years. And
Mm,
I fell back into it. He spent 5 minutes building on his own. We didn't even talk. And then I told him it's time for bed. He had a meltdown, just like of epic proportions, 0 to
mhm.
10. And it took me a minute, one, to get curious about it and understand like what's happening for you right now. So you kind of mentioned that earlier, is understand what happened before, because I didn't experience it the same way he did. But what
Yeah.
I finally got him to say was, you wasted my time. You were on your phone. Now the
Mm,
situation would have even changed. Like if I had not pulled out my phone, from a outsider looking in, it wouldn't have looked any different. But
mhm.
energetically, he knew I was disconnected from him. I wasn't engaged with him. And so I had to accept that I withdrew my engagement, even if it was just kind of an energetic connection, and
Mm.
apologize, repair, give him 5 minutes back. We spent 5 minutes building. And at the end of that 5 minutes, he had no problem going straight to bed. No complaints, no problems, went
There you
right
go.
down super easy.
Yeah.
And it really came back to connection.
And engagement, you were at a 3.
Yeah.
You actually what that's
But yeah,
because
bring
the
this back to
yeah,
the
that's well,
levels.
I didn't ever actually think of it through the perspective of this, but, you know, the levels of engagement are relationship. It's connection of kind of where you fall within. So you were at a 3. You were distracted. You wanted to engage, but you were distracted. You took out your phone, which caused him, who was at a 6, he was inspired to set goals to make a difference with you, to build with you, to connect. He dropped to a 3. So when you tried to get
Mhm,
him to do what he just needed to do on his own, which is to get ready to go to bed, which is lots of steps to get to him to go to a 6, from a 3 to a 6, he was like, wait, 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 wait. Now I'm distracted. Now you need to make
mhm,
sure that I have connection with you. A lot of times my daughter was playing with this bracelet. I gave her this bracelet. She started playing with it. She started like throwing it all around. And, I heard, my partner talking to her, and he was really upset with her. He's like, you need to give it to me, whatever. And I come upstairs and she's literally hiding. She's hiding in the couch, like with a pillow over her head. And I said, Addie, you are a good kid. You're still 3. I shouldn't have given you the bracelet. I understand that you're still learning. I said, you're a very good kid. You don't have to be embarrassed by this. You're okay. And she immediately stopped crying and she hugged me and she took the pillow off. No parent is not going to be blamed. Our kids are all going to go to some form of therapy and blame us for something. Like, we're not perfect. We're humans. I say that to my
yeah,
kids all the time. I say, I am a human. I'm going to make mistakes and I'm still growing and I'm still changing. But it is our job to look at our kids in those moments and be like, what's going on here? Because their regulation systems depend on ours until they're 25. So if we're
mhm,
distracted and we're avoidant and we're detached, and then we're like, okay, now go to sleep, they're like, excuse me. What was I doing here? No, I'm not going to go to sleep. Why would I listen to you? That's not okay. But instead, they don't say it like that. They're like, I don't want to, which is, by the way, how
yep,
most adults feel, but we just don't do it. We just swallow it and we're like,
right.
okay.
Our brains are a little bit more developed at that point, which is why, we look at these and there's all these parallels, but at the same time, like we treat our teams, our coworkers very differently than we treat our children.
Hi, Kevin here. If you're enjoying this conversation and you know someone else who's working to grow in their career while staying present at home, I'd really love it if you could share this episode with them. It's one of the best ways you can help us and help more leaders build their careers in a way that they're proud of without missing the moments that matter most.
That makes me think of like how this topic translates in a like workplace environment, specifically around incentives. So if you're training a team member that they will get incremental incentives for performing well, then sooner or later they might not take on extra responsibilities or perform at their highest level until there's an incentive given to them. So like how do you think about engagement incentives? Because with parenting, I think like the cheat code is connection and play, and then the incentives, like you said, use sparingly. But with work, like how do you translate this whole
Yeah.
framework and concept?
Yeah. I actually think the reason why I said cheat code is because it's a lot easier than connection
Maybe a
sometimes, right?
shortcut.
Where it's
Yeah.
a shortcut. Where for
Shortcut to
us,
compliance.
exactly. And I think that's also for work. And I think, when it comes to these higher levels of engagement, level 6 and 7 come from um intrinsic motivation. And there's a
Mhm.
Daniel Pink talks a lot about how extrinsic motivation, you do not have creativity or collaboration or connection from extrinsic motivation. That's not where it comes from. So getting that jump is quite hard. That being said, if you create the right conditions, if you create the right culture, if you have real values that you're living by if people are coming to work because there's something in it for them outside of just the paycheck. And those incentives are a part of the overall vision. So the whole framework and methodology, it starts with you identify what is your own seventh level. What is the thing that you represent in the world? And we have something, it's called catalyst statement. So it's this idea of what's a statement that could catalyze others, to be active participants in helping you create kind of your own reality. And so when it comes to the seventh level and this catalyst statement, it's this idea of what do you believe in? What do you stand for? What do you care about? If you don't have that, and even as a parent, by the way, if your kids don't know what you stand for, what you believe in, what you care about, as a company, if your employees have no connection to what you stand for, what you believe in, what you care about, then it's transactional, whether it's any relationship. And so they're going to just keep doing what they're doing, which is more, 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 more. Give me more. And that's how you're going to get more from me. But if it's a trusted environment where they're passionate about the work, they care about the other people that they're working with, they care about the customer. Again, it's a culture that's been designed in order for growth. And also they feel like they're seen as a person, then it's not ever going to be just about the incentives. The incentives are the bare minimum of why that person is showing up every day. That's the first thing I'll say. And the second thing I'll say is every person has their own incentives. And when you actually start to learn what those incentives are for each individual, you could have time off every day to pick up your kids from school, or maybe it is extra vacation days, or maybe it is an extra pay, and you actually learn about the individual, you care about the individual, and then you support by those incentives. It's still a part of a larger strategy that's getting them to be going to those higher levels of engagement and not staying at 5. That's the biggest problem we
Hmm.
have in employee engagement. And I also even think in parenting, you talk about connection, repair, play, all of those things take time, take energy, take effort, take presence. We are not present. We're not present in our work.
Hmm.
We're not present as parents. So we want things to be fast, productive at all costs. And that is what employee engagement is about. Be the most productive version of you, not be inspired and ignited and activated and participatory and care and make a difference. No, you be productive. Same thing with kids. Do what I say, just go to sleep, just brush your teeth, just get out the door, listen, be compliant. And that is just, to me, so sad. And that is not the way that I think that we should treat human beings.
Yeah. So first of all, Daniel Pink's book Drive was like foundational for me. That was a
Yeah.
huge eye opener as I was kind of growing as a leader in my career, understanding just intrinsic motivations versus extrinsic motivations. At that point, it was how I apply it to career. But yeah, you're right. It really applies to our children as well. I think connection, belonging, attunement, the intention you bring to that relationship is what creates more adjusted and nurtured family dynamics.
Yeah.
Um, how can a leader use the 7 levels to evaluate a relationship with a team member who maybe isn't performing their best?
I have worked with a lot of employers. I'll use one example of we've built out tools and products that actually assess engagement within workplaces, right? So there's actually ways to be able to assess that, but that's not what I'm going to talk about. I'm talking about it more from the perspective of a human to a human. So I worked with someone who was the former CMO of a Fortune 100 company, and it was like middle COVID when people were going back to the office, but there was no real reason for them to. And I told him the idea of like getting them to come back, you needed to make the incentives more because they didn't want to have to come to the office. For what reason? To then just be on Zoom calls all day? Like it absolutely made no sense. So he said, well, what do I do? Because a lot of these young people are not seeing the implications that not going into an office and not networking are going to have on their careers, especially in a huge corporate environment with thousands, thousands, thousands of employees. So for him, it was not just one person, right? There was a specific problem, which is that employees were probably between 2 and 3. 2, unsystematically engaged. They were confused on why they even had to be in the office in the first place and what they should do there. And 3, they maybe wanted to go to the office, but they had to find childcare and it wasn't enough to actually get them there. So I was saying like the pain and the gain, right? Like if they were going to have to get childcare and drive far away, and it was a different mentality. And I said to him, he was the CMO, again, super powerful, very unavailable. I said, sit in the middle of the office. Do not sit in your office. Do not have a closed door. Sit in the middle of the office in an open space. Do not have any meetings once a week and tell everyone if they come to the office, you will be available. You'll just be available. You're available one day a week, no meetings, and you're going to be able to talk to them, hang out with them, get to know them. et cetera. You're going to take it from really this incentive of, okay, come to the office for snacks, because that's what we thought, right? Like, okay,
Yeah.
you could have a ping pong table,
Foosball
like that was
table.
pre-COVID, yeah. To no, inspire them for their career, for what they want, for maybe just to get to know you, to network. So he did it, and he said it was a huge game changer. And obviously, my brain works in the levels, so it's easy for me to be like, okay, this is what's going on, and this is how to be able to change it. But really, if you look at a person, I mean, to me, the bottom levels are the most exciting because they're nuanced, right? It's either you're avoiding or idle because it's not the right tools or the right place or the right space. You're confused or you're distracted. So it's the how, okay, what's going on here, and the where. It's the what, like maybe there's something going on. And then really it's this journey of what's standing in the way of connection. So if it's your employee is not being productive or not providing outputs or whatever it may be, think about just where they fall within that. And then what is the behavior associated with that? And then the next part of the process is to ask questions. We always jump to go to a goal. Okay, my kid is doing this, and now the next step is this. For me, when I was talking to him, I asked a lot of questions to him on what was going on. Why did he want people in the office? That's how I found out that these young people not being able to network. I was like, why does it matter if people are in the office? Who cares? Like, what's in it for them? All these things. I asked a lot of questions, and then I came up with a strategy. When an employer or a manager or a leader or a parent is looking at their kid and they're like, I think that they might be like really confused right now by what I'm asking them, or I think they might be really distracted because they had too much sugar. I ask questions to them and to yourself. Just what you did. I think it might be that I was on my phone. Hey, what's going on? It seems like you're really overwhelmed. It seems like you need some control right now. It seems like you want connection. What's happening? Then come up with the goal. But those bottom three levels are pretty amazing because you could just very easily start to see that it's also you stop blaming them. You're just like, okay, they might just be really confused and have no idea what their role is or what they're supposed to do today or who to go to for something. And then the questions and then the goals.
Yeah. So we hear a lot about quiet quitting. Like, where would somebody who is like, quote unquote, quiet quit their job fall in the engagement spectrum?
Yeah. So people think that disengagement is the opposite of engagement, but it's one of the seven levels. So the opposite of engagement is apathy. And once you lose a person, once you stop acknowledging that they exist and you stop treating them like a human being, there's all this research that shows that the relationship to a manager creates more stress and strain than a relationship with like a bad marriage. Like it's because you're with them because you're with them all of the time. And so when it comes to this idea of quiet quitting, I was giving a talk and I met this woman and she said, I've been at this company for almost 20 years and I feel like I'm at the seventh level and they just don't see me. They don't even know that I'm at the seventh level. They don't care that I'm so passionate. I do all this work. That's the type of person that quiet quits. Because what happens is when you stop feeling seen, you get very quickly to below one, which is apathy. I think what we need to think about with quiet quitting is we need to think about how we reach people before they get to the point of quiet quitting, how we actually
Okay.
see the signs before they become apathetic. So
Uh-huh.
disengagement isn't quiet quitting, right? It might just look like that they're not necessarily doing the work that you need them to do that day, and being curious and asking them questions and wanting to connect with them and saying, hey, what's going on here and what can we do about this is not something that we tend to do as human beings. We keep things
Hmm.
in, we get angry, we blame them, and we say, well, they should just be doing their job. I pay them. But at the end of the day, that's not what's not going to get the best out of them. It's not going to be the best thing for you as
Hmm.
a leader. So in those
Yeah, it's
moments
not
of
leadership.
constantly, no. And it's also, this sounds like so trite, but like, it's also so boring. We are the average of the five people we spend the most time with. Why do we want to work with people that we don't care about? It doesn't
Mm,
make any sense to me. So just care and ask
yeah.
questions and try to see the signs before they drop from one, which is not quite quitting, to apathy, which is when they really feel like they're not seen anymore.
Yeah. Is there any way to salvage somebody who has gone all the way off the levels into apathy?
You know, when I met Tony Shea, who was my business partner for a really long time, and he passed away a few years ago, and he was such a prolific corporate culture and customer service person. I met him for the first time, and I went up to him. He had done a book reading for the staff of a conference that I was producing. That's how I met him. And I said to him, what if there's an employee that is just really not wanting to be at the company anymore and really frustrated by the company. And what do? How do you change that employee's perspective? And how do you help them become engaged? And he said, why would you keep them there? And for him, one of the famous things he did is he would pay people once they did the interview. He would pay them to leave if they didn't want the job. And for him, it was all about, is this a culture fit? And so I think if you've already created a culture that has someone feeling, you've not checked in with them, you've not been able to connect with them, you've not created a space where they feel like they're a part of something bigger than themselves, like this is more than just a paycheck. By that time, you're going to spend so much more. Now, I will talk from like an employer perspective. I'm not just a human to human perspective. So much time and money trying to get that person to be engaged versus just being like, okay, it's time. And I also think that when it comes to not letting people go, that's also a problem. So I call that expired milk syndrome. I feel like it's this idea that, when there's milk in the fridge, you just assume that the person that like bought the milk is going to throw it out if it's expired. And if you just don't look at the expiration date, you start drinking and then everyone gets sick just because they're drinking this expired milk. And when the leader does not fire the person that is apathetic and quiet quitting and actively disengaged and trying to kind of create drama and sometimes they create things because they're so frustrated and angry, again, maybe rightfully so, maybe not, then everyone's going to get sick around you. So it is the leader's
Mhm.
job to say, before this person is going to quiet quit, maybe I should acknowledge that the person is disengaged. I've tried to engage them. I've done everything I can, and I should let them go because they're making
Yeah.
other people disengaged.
Yeah, they're going to poison the well. I mean, I've had that experience multiple times in my career where I had to let go people who weren't actually apathetic or quite quitting. They were performing, but they had negative kind of toxic traits that were bringing into the workforce. And it was difficult to make that decision. But after I did, I had multiple employees like thank me for that leadership decision to let them go. Now, it took me longer than I probably should have to get there because
Yeah.
I really liked the metrics that those people were putting up, but it wasn't the right thing for the overall culture of the company.
Yeah. And again, that's where those higher levels of engagement come in. If the company is something that's bigger than you and you're protecting and preserving the values of that organization, then those individuals have to align. Again, the levels of engagement are not like you're at a 4. It's like you're at a 4 with this job, with this company, with this content, with your child. So in that case, is the individual actually at a higher level of engagement based on what the company stands for, what the company believes in. And that's culture fit. Is the
Yeah.
individual's values aligned with the company's values? That's how we can
Yeah.
actually, create a structure around when we say company culture.
It sounds like the advice is really, if it's a valued employee, don't let them get to the point where they are disengaged. So, how do you identify somebody who's kind of sliding down the slope slowly before they get to that point?
Well, it all does go back to culture. So the first thing I would say is actually create an environment and an organization where people know what those values are and how those values are measurable, how those values are aligned with behaviors. That's the other problem that I think that people have with values and culture is that it's not measurable. So these levels of engagement can actually take what do we believe and how are we actually measuring success against those behaviors, against those experiences? How are we programming people and technology in order to be able to do that? So first of all, it's that because you don't know if someone is actually sliding because we're not clear on where the organization's success is outside of metrics. We're not like, okay, an organization's success is the amount of relationships that my employee builds with other employees in the organization that is not work related. I'm making something up completely insane, but like based on
Okay.
friendships. So maybe the value is like we care about relationships, like relationships are the number one priority for us. And then a metric is this individual is making friends or going on a coffee or doing something with people outside of their traditional groups. That is a measurable behavior associated with culture. It's not a metric
Yes.
associated with productivity. So then if we have that, we're programming the behaviors based on the actual culture, then we know when a person is sliding down. And maybe they're sliding down because they're confused because they're like, why am I doing this? And why is this important? And what is this value? What does this mean? Maybe they're distracted because they're like, I'm an introvert and I don't want to do this. This is uncomfortable for me. Or maybe again, they're distracted because they're not a culture fit, where they're like, I
Mhm.
don't like this because I don't believe this. I don't want to
Mhm.
do this. In which you need to be curious based on the values that you believe in. But if you don't even know your values, they're just slipping or they're sliding based on the way that we currently define success, which is productivity. And that's not,
Mm.
again, actually what's creating the quiet quitting. It's not lack of productivity, it's a lack of a cultural connection.
So that's a great example of how to create the culture that prevents people sliding down the scale. In my most productive period of my career, I was completely disengaged from myself. I had so
Mm.
much pressure, so much stress. I was, it was the beginning of COVID. I was a single parent. Our company was growing. It doubled in headcount that year. And we were starting to think about acquisitions. So we were meeting with bankers. I had just more pressure and stress than I'd ever had, both inside and outside the office. And my survival mechanism was to totally disconnect from myself because if I didn't feel the stress, then I could be productive. And we were growing, we were hitting all of our metrics. But what I like later realized was like when you are totally disconnected from yourself, there's a lot of negative consequences. It's really hard to be connected with other people, with your children, if you're not experiencing the lows of stress, you're also not experiencing the highs of success. Like when we sold our company, I didn't really get to feel into the joy of that. It was this huge monumental event, but because I had spent 2 years, if not longer, really suppressing my emotions, I wasn't able to really like celebrate it.
That is, it's interesting, right? Because yeah, being disengaged from ourself is a whole other interview, which I'm happy to do. But this idea of higher engagement leads to higher achievement. So it's not that engagement is not measured by productivity. It's that level 4 and 5 of the levels of engagement is measured by productivity. But that's not how I think of that. As I say, like in the book, it's this idea of you think you've climbed Everest, but you're still at base camp. Like that's not the summit.
Hmm.
And so
Yeah.
I want
Yeah. It's the like
more.
false peak is kind of how I describe it.
Yeah. So I want more out of life and relationships than just productivity, than just comments, likes, follows, than just like going back and forth, productive at all costs. I have seen the impact of what it looks like when you are at a level 6 or 7 and you create an environment that inspires people to take care of themselves and to be a part of something that's bigger than them and to care about what they're a part of for more than just productivity. You were probably seen, and in a traditional work environment, you would have been engaged. That's how people would have seen you. You would have been very, very engaged. And that is the other problem that we have with engagement when it comes to work. And I also think in education, and I also think with our kids, that we do think of engagement as productive, as outputs. You've done well on a test, you've made the money, you've had the acquisition, you've done whatever it may be. You are productive, you are engaged, but that is not what makes us feel alive. And that is not what is a
Hmm.
sense of self. And it's not a sense of purpose. And it's not what we
Yeah.
want to teach our kids. We don't want to
Yeah.
teach our
It's not
kids.
fulfilling.
It's not fulfilling. And by the way, from meeting some of the most successful people in the world and from seeing the toll that just more and more and more and more and more success has on people, it's never enough. And once
Mhm.
you've had one of the sales or you see, it's never going to be enough. It's always five is never going to be enough. So that's what happened to you, right? Is that you just were like, okay, you get there, you get to the top of the mountain, you're like, this is it. Because you don't even remember that all of this exists for you. And I do think that as
Mhm.
as companies, we actually can create environments that make people think differently about their life and let them leave the company, take what they've learned from that experience and bring it to the rest of the world. It's not about them being with you forever, just being like a productivity machine forever. It's about them learning, being inspired, and being an active participant in their own life and shaping the world around them.
Yeah. We've talked actually quite a bit about the 7 levels of engagement as applied to leadership and career. How do you apply that to parenting and family and connection with your kids?
So again, it's an unfortunate thing that these levels are in my head all of the time because I'm constantly thinking about where people fall and what to do. So I
I
try
think it's
not to
great.
do that as much. Yeah, it's a little bit
I've done the
tiring.
same thing. Like my entire parenting philosophy has been informed from my business career. Like I couldn't figure out how to become a parent um, because the jargon, the lingo, like the language I used was just so corporate. I had to actually take corporate frameworks and very specifically translate them for my parenting. That was the only way I
Yeah,
could do it. So when I think about connection,
yeah.
um, I took a flywheel and I had to actually write it out and create it. And it's called the Spark flywheel. And it starts with safety and then attunement and then presence and then rituals and celebration. And I had to think about that all the time as to how to create connection with my kids. Or I look at like maturity models and apply that
Mm,
to how I think about like my emotional maturity and my nervous system regulation as a parent.
wow.
So I love the
That is
frameworks.
that's awesome. That's amazing. I think, it is a good way to think about it because I do think that parenting does not come naturally to everyone. I think even, you know, my partner and I we've had a lot of conversations about this because I study this, I'm in this, I've been a part of it. It's my whole life. It's just and for me, I just get kids. Like a friend of mine was telling me a story about her daughter and her husband, and they were talking about how the daughter kind of was having a fit about a cookie, and it was like where they got married. It was a story just about like how the daughter was throwing a fit in public. And I was like, "Oh, well, it was where you got married, so she didn't feel like she had a place and it wasn't hers and she felt like she wasn't special, so she needed to take control of it." They were like, "Yes, that's exactly it." So, with the levels of engagement for me, they're kind of like in the background. When I think about kids, I think about presence, and I think about that kids, they're like naturally at the seventh level with life. They just like are so, especially when they're young, they're just so eager and so curious and they're so passionate and they care and they just want to learn about everything and ask a million questions. And parents are so tired. Your kid asks you like the 30th question, like, "Mommy, can you put that, can you," and it's like, I don't know if I could answer this 30th question. But in that moment, if you do, or if you also are able to again communicate from these higher levels of engagement, like the same thing with the punishment, like not settle for just this transactional relationship with your kids, not be at a lower level of engagement when you're around them, not be at a 3 yourself, not be at a 1 if they ask you to play or if they ask you to do something, not you be at a 1, not avoiding your idol, not be like, "No, I can't do that," or "Why don't you go watch TV?" or "Why don't you," like that's they say with TV, it's one of the worst things that you could do. It's not about not watching TV. It's about replacing quality time when a child asks you to do something meaningful to then give them the TV. And so that's again, that's a level 3 behavior. And so it's really again about presence and connection and being curious and meeting them where they are. And most of the time, they're at a high level of engagement. And then if you've done that, when they don't listen, because they will not listen, you keep them, you try as much as you can. This is actually my real secret. You keep them as much as you can at a high level of engagement by being playful and fun and creative. And if they're tired or you've not given them and you're tired, you do everything in your power to the keep the 4. You do not drop the 4. You keep structure dependent engagement. You do not drop the call to actions. Now we're doing this. Now we're doing that. Now you keep it because it feels like a game. It's not even about extrinsic motivation. You're just doing the 4 to prevent the 3, to prevent the distractions.
Mhm.
The biggest thing as a parent is if once you let one distraction happen, at bedtime, it's like all bets are off. And to then try to get them from 3 to a higher level of engagement, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to sit with them, get them to again have that same presence, same connection, kind of make it fun again and bring them to that higher because they naturally are in these higher levels of engagement and keep them feeling like it's fun. I mean, even doing things with you should be fun. If it feels like a chore, they're not
Mhm.
going to do it. So the 4 is like making it fun and making it very quick and you're trying to prevent those 3s, but you're trying to stay, which is why again being such a self-aware parent is so exhausting. You're trying to stay at these higher levels of engagement with your kids most of the time. And if you're exhausted,
Yes.
you're admitting it and you're acknowledging it and you're communicating it to them, which is still presence. And then you're sitting with them and you're saying, "Listen, I'm so tired. You're just going to watch the TV and I'm going to sit next to you and I'm going to read my book or I'm going to do my breath work. I'm exhausted. You're exhausted. This is what we're going to do today. But you're acknowledging it first. So it doesn't feel like you are pushing them to a 3. You're pushing them to be distracted.
Yeah. I I think play is just a huge unlock. And I agree though,
Yeah,
like sometimes I'm just exhausted and I don't have it in me. But if I can just bring myself to, for example, again, I'll just use bedtime. Transitions are hard for my kids. So say it's bedtime, we're doing something fun. They really don't want to go. If I can just get creative and maybe it's convincing them to do a bear crawl with me down the hallway or a crab walk
exactly.
down the hallway and like
Exactly.
making some sort of fun way out of it, that transition gets a lot easier. But it's hard
You're
to
inspiring them to
like,
set goals to make a difference. It's something fun and
yeah,
creative and it's not an extrinsic motivation. It's getting them to get out of their own heads. But yes, again, it's exhausting, but it's the acknowledgement
yeah,
of if you were to even say to your son, it's the presence and the accountability. Hey, I'm going to be on my phone. I'm really tired. For 5 minutes, you do Lego on your own. Then we'll do, but we aren't present. You did it. You said what you
hmm
said. You just went on the phone because you were like, I'm done. And I done it too. Like I am, you're just like, you're zombie out. You're like, I'm so done. That lack of accountability will drop our kids to lower levels of engagement, which is what we're talking about with work as well. I mean, it's about accountability, self-awareness. These levels of engagement are about self-awareness as well. What can I do to improve this dynamic? If every single person on earth said, what can I do to improve this dynamic? We would be in a much better place. And we wouldn't have over-functioning people like me trying to improve every dynamic while everyone else was like, well, you're going to improve the dynamic, Amanda. So I think I'll just hang out and sit here, sit back here. Doesn't really work.
Amanda, I could go down like so many more paths with you. Maybe we could. I would love to have a follow up episode
Yeah,
sometime.
please.
I didn't even get a chance to talk to you about the future of education and AI and your book. Like, there's so many topics that we were going to talk about, but I really appreciate just the wealth of knowledge, the sheer amount of passion that you've put into this subject, and the courage that you have to live your work at home. I think you showed us that the true opposite of engagement is apathy, and that incentives might buy compliance, but real connection builds commitment, and that presence and accountability and repair is what raises the level of teams and kids to higher levels. I really appreciated your stories and how you model respect with your 5 and 3-year-old. It really brought the framework to life. So I just want to say thank you for joining today. This was a really special episode.
Thank you.
If you're enjoying this conversation, make sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. CEOs and ABCs is all about helping you grow in your career and show up at home. We've got many more amazing guests coming up, so tap follow and stay tuned.